Welcome to the Inside Out Money Podcast.
Can't even recognize this place. Too many pieces of our past mistakes.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I believe real change starts from the inside out. So let's work together to improve our money and our lives from the inside out. We will explore all things money and our relationship with it. Join me each week with a rotating set of co-hosts, friends, and interviews. Let's jump in.
It's time, we going round and round and round and round and round.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our 50th episode of the Inside Out Money Podcast. This is very exciting for me and feels like a special milestone to have reached our 50th episode. I really just want to say thank you to all of the co-hosts, Andrew, Erica, Liz, and Greg, and to all of our listeners for supporting this great endeavor and sharing feedback along the way and engaging in interesting comments. I really appreciate all of you. And for our 50th episode, we're doing something a little bit different and, to be quite honest, a little bit unexpected and unplanned also. Greg and I were at CampFI a couple weeks ago. And for those who haven't heard of CampFI, it's CampFI, by the way. I've heard it described as summer camp for money nerds. It's like an adult summer camp. It's awesome. It's 3 days, 3 nights. We're kayaking, canoeing, doing like ropes courses in the woods. There's archery. We're by the campfire at night. It's just a super chill, relaxed environment. And it is full of people who are often on their road to financial independence who have already reached it. It's just an incredibly supportive and motivating environment. Greg and I went to it 2 years ago, and it was about 3 months before we early retired. And it was a much different experience for us just because of the state we were in at the time. And we had a great time then. We had a fantastic time at this one. And we are committed to try to go to more and more of them because they're just awesome. If you want more information, you can go to campfi.org. But while we were at CampFi, Stephen, the founder, at one point was like, hey, do you want to record a podcast perhaps while you're here? And I had brought my mic with me, but only one mic, because I always bring my microphone with me. You just never know what could happen. And it doesn't take up a lot of space in my bag. And I was like, we could try to pull something together. So we did a live podcast recording one night. And that's what this episode is. I got to interview 2 different couples that we just met at CampFi, both similar ages to Greg and I. One of them, Bob and Amber, just retired about 3 months ago. And the other one, Andy and Stacy, retired about 2 years ago. So very different lengths of time and experience under their belts. But we had a really nice conversation, and we want to share it with you for this episode. So a couple things before we jump into it. One, I apologize for any of the audio quality. We were in a huge room with not the best acoustics, and we were sharing one mic and passing it back and forth. So I did my best to edit this and make it sound as clean as possible, but please excuse some of the bumping and back and forth with the mic. 2, because it's our 50th episode, and just because if you're here, you probably enjoy listening to this podcast, or perhaps this is your first episode, but it's super helpful when we get actual written reviews on the Apple Podcast app. So as a 50th episode thank you, or something like nice you could do for somebody today, I would love it if you would take a moment. You could pause the podcast right now. You have to actually go to the Apple Podcast app. And if you're on an episode, click on the Inside Out Money name up at the top and just get to the main Inside Out Money podcast page on Apple Podcast. Scroll all the way down and you'll see a place where you can actually leave a 5-star rating, but you can also click write a review. And that's the most important part, is actually write a written review. We'd love to hear how the podcast has helped you, what you think of it. It helps other people find the podcast and know if this is a podcast that they might enjoy based on the review you write. It's something that doesn't cost any money. It only takes a minute. And speaking of money, this is a passion project for me. I don't have any ads in it. I don't ever plan to put any ads in it. I don't make any money off of this. So it truly is a passion project, and it's just a little thing you could do to help out the podcast. So I really appreciate it if you have the time to do that. That being said, let's now jump into this episode, which is a live interview at CampFi Southeast, March 2024. Here we go. Stacy was going to start us off with a song. Oh, just kidding. But I think there will be karaoke tomorrow night, so. We have a very special setup for this week's episode, something we've never done before. We are live at CampFI Southeast, and I'm going to be talking with two different couples that I met yesterday and really haven't actually talked to that much before, just coming up to you and asking you if you would be on this podcast that you've never heard of or listened to before. So thank you for joining. So we have Andy and Stacy, and we have Bob and Amber, and I'm going to let you all introduce yourself in just a moment. Thank you for coming on. We're going to talk to you all, and then we're going to open it up to the audience of attendees at CampFI to ask some questions on what we're talking about today. And I'm going to give a really quick shout out to Stephen, who is the founder, organizer, everything for CampFI. And this is a true passion project because I sat around last night and listened to 80 people introduce themselves, and all the people who had been to CampFIs before told just really amazing stories about how meaningful these experiences have been to them on their financial journey, lifestyle journey, just everything. And so I just want to give a shout out to Stephen, who puts a ton of his own personal time, energy, and money into this. Is not like something where this is not his early retirement plan to be able to retire faster. This is truly a passion project. So thank you, Stephen. And we'll jump in. So I'm going to start with Bob and Stacy. Andy and Stacy. I'm going to start with, I was actually going to switch it up on you guys and be like, you should figure out what life would be like if you're going to go on a boat next year and No, we're sorry. I mean, in fairness, I did say we just met yesterday. But we're going to start with Andy and Stacy, and I would love for you two to give like a little bit of an elevator pitch introduction of who you are, age, social security number, whatever you'd like to share.
So hi, we're Andy and Stacy. We're 41 years old. We live in Jacksonville, Florida. We retired 2 years ago. Yeah, almost exactly 2 years ago. And we are currently living off of passive income from a rental portfolio that's remote from where we live, but just living off that income from that portfolio. We had successful corporate America careers, kind of like the typical engineering careers. We did have a big opportunity that we took advantage where we took expat assignments overseas, and they offered very large incentives to go there because it was kind of in a remote work area. So that kind of jump-started our early retirement. Although I guess taking one step back 10 years ago-ish, we kind of got on the path and we decided by age 40 we wanted to be done with work. So we probably wouldn't have gotten there without the expat assignments, and that, like I say, kind of kick-started us, changed the trajectory of our retirement. So we got to the goal by age 40.
That is awesome. Stacy, that included your intro, I think, right? She's gonna sing for us later, though, so stay tuned.
So we are also engineers. This is Amber, yes. Amber and Bob. We're also engineers, 44 and 45. And so we have always been frugal. We had a nest egg we had put together, and about 5 years ago, we discovered FI because we were also trying to figure out, we're saving a lot of money, what are we gonna actually do with this? So discovering FI led to basically a huge acceleration of then we can actually retire in 5 years. And so we are 3 months retired. So we quit our jobs December 15th, typical, W-2 type jobs, and are really excited about our vision of traveling and sailing, which is what we're going to be doing moving forward.
Bob endorses it. Okay. Yes. Thank you both for sharing that. I am super curious to hear what specifically motivated you to take what is a very different path than, I think it's fair to say, the majority of people in this world. Stacy, we'll start with you.
Early and unexpected death.
Can you elaborate on that? Or do I want you to?
People dying early and unexpectedly, and then thinking, what are we waiting for?
Yeah.
I love the shock that people have on their faces when she talks about this.
Serious or not?
She is serious.
Dead serious.
While I completely agree with what she's saying, my story's a little different. I had a coworker who, we worked alongside each other, and I really genuinely liked my job when I was an engineer, but it was still a job, and I kind of had a day that I wasn't having a very good day, and I was complaining to him, and he said, "Well, get used to it because you're going to be doing this for the next 45 years." And I was in my like early 20s, and I was like, there's got to be another way. And that kind of like got the wheels turning. I think this was even before I had ever even heard of Mr. Money Mustache. And I don't know, I think that kind of got us in the mindset before we even knew that this FIRE movement even existed.
Okay, that is fascinating. And on the death comment, which I really wasn't sure if you were serious, but I can totally relate. I mean, that was a big one in terms of realizing, like, it's cliche, but like life's short, and why not now?
So I'd say one of the things that I always found was interesting is we've had a lot of different jobs and we've switched jobs. And one of the things that we found is that like our amount of leave that we get every year went down because you reset, you get to the new job and you're back to 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it is. And pretty much always used all of our vacation, and it was always limiting. It was always the one that limited like how much we did every year. So we'd do, maybe 2 vacations or 3 vacations at most. And I'd always, that's one of my favorite topics that I'd always talk to coworkers about. And it was interesting because a lot of coworkers would just be like, that's fun, but I couldn't do it full time. And, there's only so many places that I want to go. And I was always fascinated with that conversation because to me, the hardest thing to do was figure out what was the next place. And to me, it was always kind of a sad moment when you finally decided our next vacation is going to be here because you eliminated everything else on the list. And it's like, I still want to go to all of these other things, but now I decided that I'm going to this. And like, now I feel like we can actually spend a ton of time and go to all these different things and kind of do it full time and not be limited so much by the vacation time that's allotted by this other company.
Thank you both for sharing that. I am very curious how things are going so far. So Andy and Stacy, you guys are like about 2 years in. You guys are much newer. You look at, my favorite part is that Bob looks at his watch when I asked him how long. So Bob and Amber are like 3 months in. So I'm curious, and we're going to dig into this deeper. You're going to get more than just this, but describe your early retirement so far in a few emojis. Oh, wait, no one can see you. You got to, okay. I'm going to need you to verbalize that emoji, but Bob just put his hands up in the air. He's very excited. It wasn't the crying emoji.
It was not the crying emoji. It was just super excited. Like, it's been the best time ever. Like, it's been interesting. Like, people are always like, oh, you're going to miss work. You miss your coworkers and all this. And it's like, we've been so busy, which has been interesting, but I haven't looked back at all and said, I want to go back to work.
We're definitely still in the honeymoon phase, but it's awesome. So
I would just like to note, I believe you don't have kids, right? Okay, yeah. I'm not saying early retirement isn't awesome, but like my first 3 months, I didn't have those emojis. I was just like driving people to school every day.
I would say, well, first of all, I guess we'll get into this later, but I'm kind of cheating a little bit because I did get a part-time consulting gig. We'll get into that in future questions. But for me, I'd say probably like, I can't tell if it's nervous or excited, but there's that smiley face. It's like really smiley with all the big teeth. And it's always like, am I excited or not? So that's, the flat smile. That's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, besides the death emoji, like the death with a thumbs up. It's like, we know it's coming, so enjoy your life. Maybe the smile with the starry eyes.
Okay, so to go into more detail, I'm curious to hear from both of you how you planned for this transition. Like, what did you or didn't you do to plan? How extensive was your planning? And just generally, like, how's it been? You guys have more how's it been than your 3 months, so we'll start with the 2 years, and then we'll go to 3.
So we made a spreadsheet 10 years ago. That was our 10-year plan and executed that. I think that's probably one of our proudest moments is just how well we executed that together. And I think what we've learned in the FI community since that's become a thing is that a lot of people are recommending things like CoastFi or BaristaFi, where like you kind of integrate the benefits of semi-retirement or retirement into your life when you're already working, so that you get some of that experience and you can enjoy some of those things in life. Andy and I think we're on the early end of that and hadn't gotten that memo. So we did the push 10 years, go 110%, and then we cut to 0. And I think that's something that we would tell other people probably to do differently. And that is something that's different in the FI community now because people have had that kind of abrupt end. So how did we prepare for the transition? We made a 10-year plan and executed it, and we hit that finish line and didn't really plan beyond that. Some of it, I'll say, which has left us we've, floundered a little bit for a couple years because, now the opportunities are endless, but we didn't think ahead a ton. I will say, to our credit, we thought we were going to work maybe a couple more years overseas, but COVID hit and we hadn't seen our family in a couple years. The only way that we were able to return to the US is if we quit our jobs. So we said, enough is enough. We're just going to go home. So with the COVID time, we were like, we couldn't just spend endless amounts of time visiting friends and family. Like, that's our number one priority, and we'll figure out the rest later. But that also, in hindsight, has left us floundering a little bit because we did not plan for after that transition.
And I think the only thing I'll add to that is when she and we say floundering, that is not to say that we're not enjoying it. It's just a little bit of growing pains, like trying to figure out how to navigate all of it, right? So I think when you tell people outside of the FI community, like, that you're having a little trouble figuring this out, they're like, see, I told you it wouldn't work, right? But in this community, I don't think you get that, but just want to be clear that we're not unhappy with the decision. It's just, we're just figuring it out.
I think that's a really good point that you just made, Andy. And what I've experienced is in this community, you actually get I told you, like, floundering is normal. And you're gonna flounder, and you're just gonna kind of go through this whole phase of rewiring yourself, and just, it's a huge lifestyle change. And so I think it's, from what I've heard, it's just incredibly normal. And myself and Greg have gone through the exact same thing. Okay, turning it over to Bob.
And to Amber.
Yeah, so similarly, we had a 5-year plan. So we had spreadsheets and things before, but as we really accelerated and looked at a final date, we had a 5-year plan that was strangely based on when we would be vested in a particular pension that we actually didn't end up even doing, but we set a line in the sand. We put a date on the calendar. We started a countdown at our last house that we had, and it was on a whiteboard, and we did a huge countdown. I would say a lot of that really helped to basically say, this is how much we need. We had the spreadsheets, we had the numbers. We also had things in place to really say, this is what we're gonna do. We also have the luxury that we were doing this together. And so we both, on the same day, handed in our resignation letter, told our bosses we're giving our 3 weeks and we will be retiring. Our families knew, they've been supportive. But it's really exciting, and it's really, like, as much as we're in the honeymoon phase, there are always mixed emotions of, like, what you're doing. Because then we went right into, we've sold all our stuff. But I would say for me, the, like, really amazing part is that we have a shared vision for what we're doing. So we have a plan for 2024. We're doing slow travel. We're going from place to place, staying in Airbnbs for a month at a time. We're going to go visit family. And then we're going to be crazy, and we're going to buy a boat, and we're going to go sail around the world. And that shared vision is just so exciting. Okay, that's
So one more thing that I'd add, just because I thought it was kind of funny. So we would go hiking frequently. We were in Colorado at the time, and a lot of what we would discuss is trying to figure out, what are we going to do? This was before we'd kind of figured out our 5-year plan. And so as we figured out, hey, let's retire early, we don't have kids, this will give us focus and a way to kind of manage their money and enjoy our time, we tried to ballpark how much we need. So we'd figure out, okay, we have this expense, and then you kind of total those up and multiply it by 25 to kind of get, a rough idea of kind of what you'd need. And we do this over and over again on these hikes, all the way in our head, trying to be like, wait, is it this? And you try to, like, multiply it, and it was always confusing, but we'd always come up with the same number. And then we're like, okay, well, that's a good enough to start with. And then we did all of these spreadsheets to do it in minute detail and came up with the exact same number. And so it was very encouraging, and it's been the same number since, like, forever. That's been kind of our FI number to kind of shoot for.
Do you want to share your number? I'm just kidding. I don't share a lot of numbers like that, so don't worry about it. By the way, Amber, I don't think it's crazy at all what you got. Like, I think in this room, too, you have more people who say, that's not crazy. That sounds awesome. I can't wait till I can do stuff like that. I am, just a quick aside, do either of you have any sailing experience, or is this like a whole new? You looked unsure. Oh, no. Okay, sorry. Oh, sorry. You're not holding the mic.
I was waiting for the mic.
I like our new sign.
Yes, we have a sailing experience. Actually, 7-8 years ago, Amber got me for my birthday a sailing lesson. And so we're in Colorado and we're sailing on this minuscule little lake on a tiny little dinghy. And this guy is showing us, the basics of sailing. And then, so after that, we're probably on a hike talking about, well, that was kind of neat. What should we do with this? And we kind of came up with this idea to be like, hey, it'd be really neat to, kind of build on this and kind of make it so that we can actually do more of it. And I think it was like maybe the next year we were trying to figure out, hey, it'd be really cool if we could rent like a huge boat down in the Caribbean and actually do that for a week, which we did last year. So it's like every single year we've built on it and done a little bit more and try to just kind of build up our experience and do it in a smart way to be a little bit more each year.
Very cool. Okay, I'm curious to shift to, and some of you kind of spoke to these or alluded briefly to them, but what challenges have you faced since you early retired, and kind of shifting that into what advice would you give to others considering this path based on not just like challenges, I guess, but also what's working well for you? Challenges, what's working well, advice, you can just like mush that all together.
Okay. So I alluded to it before. So I guess I don't know if it's a challenge. It's just an opportunity, I guess. After we quit, I was off for 3 or 4 months probably. And then a friend of mine had an opportunity for a part-time consulting gig. So in the engineering field that I was in before. So it was kind of always a thing that I had always said when I was full-time, if I ever had a chance to work half-time, like I would do it in a heartbeat. So I felt like I kind of owed it to myself to try. And I'm sure there was like a little bit of, you can get a little more money too, right? And be a little more conservative. So I've been doing that for about a year and a half now. And I think the biggest challenge for me is trying to force myself to like that I can quit. And I know I'm not worried financially. I'm not worried about being bored. I actually feel like I have less time than ever, and I'm only working half the amount of time I was before. I think it's more just the feeling of having a real responsibility, like people relying on me and being able to accomplish things. So I'm sure there's other ways for me to get that, but I'm looking in the near future to actually kind of get out of this consulting role and actually officially, like, quote unquote, retire. So. Do
you want to pick a date now and we can all hold you accountable? Stacy did not ask me to ask that question, but she's excited.
I'm not sure. The date I'm thinking of is like end of June. Okay. So basically, yes.
June
So like, yes. So like, what is that? 4 months, 3 months from now? That's what I'm thinking. When I come to CampFI's, everyone's like wants to push you off the cliff at CampFI, which is great.
Met and I'm already
yep.
pushing you.
So I have to bottle up this energy and save it till I have a week where I actually think I should stay. So, but that's what I'm leaning towards right now.
So I've gone the route of, I have an exploratory to-do list that's like everything I've ever wanted to do in the world, and I'm slowly chipping away at that. So I get analysis paralysis sometimes, or whatever version of that, when you have just way too many options. And so, I'm trying anything from like, do I want to try ice skating, to I was crocheting the other day. Like I joined a book club. I went to a Spanish meetup. I'm doing a lot of FI events. I've done some like financial mentoring. And so that's been awesome, right? Like that's really cool. But that I think has also led to sort of like a little bit of confusion and like just a lot going on in my head for like what this retirement phase looks like. So that's been kind of a double-edged sword for me. It's been an awesome opportunity. I think it's also a little bit challenging because you're kind of into everything. And I think you could also end up spending a lot of money like trying all these different things. So I'm trying to be aware of that so I don't get like top of the line oil pastels and then decide that I'm not going to be a painter. But there's a lot of freedom in trying all of those things too.
One more comment. I feel bad that I'm still working because for the last like 10 years we've been doing this thing as a team, and then I kind of feel like I like let the team down because I got a job, which is a weird thing to say. But so that's another thing is I want to make sure that we're moving forward together and that not forcing her to like find out what she wants to be when she grows up on her own, because I think it is kind of a team thing for us. So.
Well, when you quit that job in June, then it will be. So, and I saw her face. She really wants you to. Like, she's serious. She wants someone to go do oil painting with. Okay, same question.
So I have couple different things. One financial, one more kind of mental, I guess. So on the financial side, one of the things that challenges and one of the things I'd wish we had done more on was not just doing your portfolio for long-term growth if you're not have a long-term horizon. So if you're intending to pull from your portfolio in like 2-3 years, maybe you shouldn't have, 100% equities. Might be a good idea. So we've worked on like trying to restructure and build up more cash and more kind of things that we can pull from over the last couple of years. That's been kind of a challenge to like, okay, unfortunately, we've already had all this stuff invested for a decent chunk of time and have capital gains in it. And it's like, how do we reconfigure a lot of that kind of at the last minute without triggering a lot of gains? So that's been one of the challenges kind of more on the financial side that I wish we had thought about a little bit more, like say 5 years ago, and say, what is the plan to say, what do we want our portfolio to look like day one of retirement, and move toward that instead of just saying, oh, we're investing everything. And then, oh, by the way, we're retiring in a couple of years and now we need to change everything. So that would be kind of one of the challenges. I say more on the financial side. Kind of socially, it's been kind of interesting. One of the things, like we are excited about traveling and kind of doing more digital nomad, but one of the things that we've been struggling with is how do we make connections? How do we meet people when you're not in the same place at the same time? Because when you are in the same place, you go to the meetups, you can go to events and things that are local and make a lot of those connections. And so this is one of the things that, kind of popped up. Actually, Andy and Stacy were like, hey, you guys should come to this. And we're like, okay. We just happened to be in the area, and it just dropped in our lap, and I'm really glad we did, but it's not been kind of natural for us. But that's one of the things we've been kind of struggling with is like, how do we do kind of digital nomad and actually make connections with people and make meaningful, so it's not just the two of us all the time.
Yeah, and then one other specific challenge had just been figuring out how to domicile in different locations. So, that's a whole, we're getting great information from people. So thank you to those that we've chatted with, figuring out, permanent addresses and all sorts of interesting things as you no longer are going to, as we sell our house and no longer have an official address. So we're working through those types of details too, which is actually part of the reason we wanted to do a year before we get on the boat so that we didn't have to deal with all of that detail and actually be on a sailboat at the same time. So yeah, that's going well. But there is definitely the mental side of thinking through how to make connections. And I will say, I know we're super early into this. I have not at all been bored nor had not enough to do. We've had a ton of fun things. So that's been really wonderful thus far.
I'll just say real quick, if no one else ever listens to this podcast, this is really cathartic for me because a lot of the things you guys are talking about, like we've said, it's sometimes hard to find people that can relate. And I don't want to go to some of my best friends at home and complain about my early retirement life when they're like still slogging away at a really stressful 60-hour-a-week job. It just doesn't like land well. And the conversation, I just sort of talk about other things. And so it is incredibly helpful because look, we're all in an incredibly privileged state to even be in the positions we're in. And I constantly like to recognize that and appreciate that. But it still is, you just deal with a whole different set of challenges, isn't even the right word, but circumstances in life that you have to figure out and get through. And Stacy, when you were talking about kind of your list too, I got this from someone else who has a podcast called Go Bucket Yourself, but they talked about a retirement bucket list. And I started one maybe a year before I retired. And I have this list of like 200 things, and I have gotten through like 2 of them. And yeah, it's overwhelming. And I haven't been bored. I don't have a lot of time where I'm like, oh, what do I do next? And it is a like unique and fascinating experience. So I appreciate you all sharing your perspectives. Last question, and then we're going to go to the audience for some questions. How do you both maintain a sense of purpose and fulfillment? And maybe we'll skip you, Andy, because you're getting it, perhaps. That's actually what you're worried about leaving, it sounds like. But how are you maintaining that sense of purpose and fulfillment without traditional work? And Stacy, I'm going to start with you because you're officially the longest without traditional work in this group sitting here because of your part-time job, Andy, that you're going to quit soon.
One note back to the bucket list idea. Andy had said this, but I think this is also a lesson learned for us. We made a plan to, and this isn't a dig on Andy, we talk about this all the time, but we made a plan to retire together and figure it out. Again, we didn't do a ton of planning for what we were going to do, but we knew we would do it together. Without a plan, a job fell into his lap. It was a huge opportunity. We both agreed this is the right thing to do. But then when I'm looking at my bucket list, I want to do those things together, right? So we've been in this kind of weird position in the last couple years where I'm waiting to start my bucket list things because Andy and I absolutely want to do those together. And in the meantime, I'm having a great time crocheting and oil painting, pet sitting with varying results. And I had a client die. My first client died.
You're going back to death?
You mean the client, the pet died?
Mm-hmm.
She was
The
very
pet.
old.
She was old, and
It was the dad.
he told me that she was probably gonna die. Maybe the good news, and this is where you find out that maybe you're better at something than, like, you don't even realize you're good at something. But we had just lost our dog that was the exact same breed, the exact same size, just a few months prior, and so I was there for him. Like, I knew exactly what that felt like. And so my sister told me I should be like a hospice, like, animal carer, and like help the owners like through their, through their grief and that transition. So I think all in all it went okay, and I'm really glad I was there to support him. But if you just look at my success rate with pet sitting, it started off poor.
Bob?
Oh, it got passed. We've talked about this a lot. I think the honest answer is I'm not sure yet. We're focused on a couple things. One is trying to connect with other people, especially because we're on this journey together. And then the other piece we've really talked about is, how do we give back in the sense of we'd love to do some volunteering and things like that. So that's at top of mind. I would love to hear from you all if you have ways of doing that while being a nomad, because that's kind of an interesting challenge as well. So my honest answer is we're working on that. We're really excited and on our journey, and I want to acknowledge the excitement and privilege that we have to be doing that, but also that's something we're thinking about.
So I will say it's going to be hard. One of the things, like, I'm an electrical engineer. I've been an electrical engineer for 20 years, and it has defined kind of who I am. And it's always, the first question that most people ask is, what do you do? And it's not been easy to kind of think about, okay, what do we do kind of going forward, and kind of set that aside and not be that kind of moving forward. I think the engineer is an interesting piece because I think at my core, I'm an engineer. Like, I kind of approach things in a certain way and kind of have a certain way of thinking about things. But being to the point at which saying I'm, leading this project and I'm an engineer and designing these components is not going to happen maybe ever again. And it's been interesting to try to figure out. We're fairly new as well, and I haven't totally figured out what to do about that. But I know it's something we talk about a lot, and trying to figure out how do we do that going forward, and how do we kind of have meaning beyond that, because it has kind of ended. This path will basically kind of sever that, and most likely will not go back to being that kind of engineer and not that kind of specialty. So it is interesting, and it's something I know I'm definitely going to struggle with kind of going forward. It hasn't been long enough for me to really kind of reach that point, but I know it's definitely going to be something I'll struggle through.
I'm just going to add one other thing to that. The other piece that we talk about a lot is also that we allow ourselves the luxury of changing our mind. So as amazing and wonderful and as excited as we are right now, if at some point we decide to do something different, that's okay too. So just wanted to add that.
I think that's a great point on all of these things. Is anyone, whether you're employed, whether you're retired, whatever you're doing, you likely have a lot of agency to make changes at any point in time, or with enough notice and with enough support. And I also will say, on the volunteer work piece and on the kind of purpose and fulfillment, I personally have found a lot of that coming from a high paid kind of like leadership position, and then just stopping it. I was super worried about it. And I always use this example of, like, I'm the volleyball team mom and I organize snacks. And one of the things I wanted to do was help other stressed out parents that don't have time for all this crap they get asked to do, because I was once that person. And I find, like, the same sense of accomplishment when a bunch of other moms like thank me for something, and there's other volunteer roles that don't have anything to do with the kids that I do. I find the same. It's oddly just as satisfying when you get like an attaboy from somebody in your neighborhood or some volunteer organization you're working with, as you do when you got some review at work, or when it actually kind of means more, because it's more meaningful stuff than like some, I don't know, PowerPoint I put together or meeting I ran or something. And so I've found that I have been able to fill that thing that I was worried about, being a void. Okay, we're going to turn it over for those on the listening. I'm pointing to the people in the room. We're going to turn it over and take some questions, unless there's anything you want to like add before we do that real quick. Go for it.
I have one thought on the last thing you said, just with purpose and fulfillment. And you kind of touched on it yourself, actually, with, we left our jobs when we were kind of in a peak in our career. So, we were really on our game. We felt like we knew what we were doing. You have a lot of confidence, at that point in your career. And I think what I found in the last 2 years, especially trying all new things, is I suck at them. So like obviously I'm a terrible pet sitter, but I'm not great at crocheting, I'm not in, the next Monet. So it's been kind of a shift, right? From being like, I'm awesome at something to being like, wow, everything I try, not only am I a beginner at it, but I suck at it, and I don't really feel like taking the effort to like become a pro. So I am working through that, and I think that's one thing, Andy and I are trying to figure out, like, where do you get that sense of accomplishment, that sense of satisfaction? And fortunately, we always do have our real estate portfolio in the background, right? That's what's sustaining us financially. So we get together and reconcile that. We talk through any issues, stuff that's coming up, and that's frequent enough that it's kind of like, we do the high five at the end of that meeting, and we're like, that's right, we did this. We still got it. Yeah. So, I mean, the teamwork that we have and how we got here, like, that absolutely is a foundation that continues to, like, be that fulfillment, but I don't know that I've found, like, other activities that kind of give me that same gratification that I got making an awesome PowerPoint.
Okay. We're going to open it up to the audience. If you do have a question, just come up, say your name, talk into the mic, ask your question. And if it's to someone in particular versus just to whoever wants to answer, clarify that also. Okay, Steven, our first question. You can actually just...
Is Stephen Boyer. My question's for Stacy. I have a comment for Stacy first. I had a pet that was lost on my watch, so we can share in that. It wasn't my pet. I was pet sitting as well. Did it come back? Like, oh no. No. Yeah. That's a great movie. I love that movie. No. So, yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah. So, we share that a little bit. But my question is, both of you couples are very far along. You're financially independent. What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out, like in the early stages? They've just found financial independence. And do you have any kind of tidbits or advice for them?
The number one thing I'd say is find a community that supports you. It's hard when you're in corporate America or wherever you work to find people that are on the same page as you. Everyone kind of wants to poo-poo your ideas of early retirement because either they think it's not possible or they don't want to take the steps that it requires. But when you come to events like CampFI or any of the other FI retreat type things, it literally changes your life because you meet people who are in the exact same mindset as you. I'd say for the first year of our quote unquote retirement, we were a lot more lost than we are now. And a year ago at this event, CampFI, we came and it literally changed our lives. We have friends now in a new city that we live, and we actually feel like we have a tribe, people that understands us. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, sure. I very much agree with the community part. I would also say, keep in mind that put the basics in place. Think through maybe what your numbers are. Think through maybe what it looks like for you. But also remember that there's a million different ways of getting to the end point and that you can customize it as much as you want and really make it work for you, because there's a lot of different approaches. There might be things that are important to you that you value that are going to be different than other people. And one of the things I really do like about the community, though, is that everybody's super supportive no matter which direction you're headed. We're all on the path together. So
for us especially, it was helpful to have what do you want to do? Yes, you quitting the job isn't what you want. You want to do the things that the job is kind of preventing you from doing, or at least that was the case for us. It's we want to travel. We want to be able to do all these cool things. And so what we ended up kind of doing was kind of rehashing what the first year would look like, or the first 5 years. And we went through 20 or 30 different iterations of we could do this, we could do this, could do this. And then then we finally had to kind of like pick one and pull it together. And to me, that once we kind of had that idea of, hey, this is what we could do, it was much easier to figure out, okay, well, how do we get there? Like, how much money do we need to sustain that? How much money do we need to kind of do that? And to me, that helped kind of figure out what the path is to that. But until you know what you want to do, like, what are you even retiring early for? To me, you need something to kind of occupy your time and something that you're like, I really, really want to do that and kind of move toward it. And some of them, like the sailing piece, is something we really wanted to do. And we started 7 years ago. It's like we didn't need to be fully retired to be able to do that. We can enjoy it more now, but like being able to start some of those things before you hit the end, I think is super helpful too. It helps kind of keep the momentum.
Thank you. That's great. I'll also add, I don't know where on the journey you are, or this person in your hypothetical scenario is, Stephen, but spend less than you make. That's like the first thing I tell them, so they actually can get to having some options. And then I think you guys alluded, well, many of you have alluded to it, but just this idea of so many people will spend so much time kind of like putting in 150% to get to some elusive finish line, and they're just slogging away at something for however long to get to a destination, and it's like, 150 and then zero. And I do think there's something to be said for enjoying the journey and, taking a sabbatical, and like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I think we did the path of like just really sucking it up for a while and getting there. But in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, oh, I wish I had taken these other times earlier in my life when I very much could have afforded to take some time off or take a step back or different things. And I think there's just so many different like colors and flavors this can come in. It doesn't have to be, a full early retirement, or it doesn't have to be kind of one way or another. Okay, another question, Wally.
Wally from Jacksonville. I'm curious if any of you retired before your parents, and if so, what was their response or impact it may have had on them?
That's a great question.
Not our parents. Our parents retired before us, but I will say that is one group of people that we struggle talking to about this, is people who are of retirement age but have not retired yet. And we don't ever want it to feel like we're bragging. I'm very uncomfortable talking about our retirement with those people. I don't want it to feel like a brag, and also I think sometimes there's a little bit of resentment maybe. But yeah.
There's been a weird amount of, I'd say with coworkers more, when we ended up, I think, kind of making up a story. We start lying because it's, when you're not within the FI community, it's just so misunderstood, and people really don't understand, why you would do this and how you're allowed to do this and all of this stuff. So, but at work, I remember amongst our coworkers, there's folks nearing retirement age. They get wind of the fact that we're retiring. We're in our 30s at that time. And there's this weird, like, reverse judgment thing where, like, people would come to me and be like, well, if I didn't have, if my mom wasn't sick, then, I could do this too. And I'm like, I'm not asking you to retire. Like, or, they're like, well, my wife just needed a new car, so we're going to work a couple more years. I'm like, I don't care. Like, and so I think that's one of the weird things that I've gotten, where there's like this like reverse judgment where people think like I'm saying you did something wrong because you're in your 60s and you're retiring, and I'm in my 30s and I'm retiring. And I don't feel that. And that's what I love in the FI community. None of us feel that way. Whether you're 60, whether you're 80, whether you're 30, like, people are just glad you're achieving your goals. But I think in the outside world, there's this weird, like, everyone's comparing themselves to each other. And I don't feel like we do that the same way here.
That's interesting. I think it's interesting that you even said you have to like make up a story. And I often am thinking a lot lately about like this quote, American dream we're all sold, of what success looks like and what we're supposed to be striving for. And as soon as you do something that's kind of different, it makes people uncomfortable. I will say though, I oddly got way more people that were really like honest with me and like, I'm jealous and how did you do that? Right. And we're very like curious, but I think you have to be, I don't know, more kind of in touch with like what you want and what's important to you in life to even have that response versus a more defensive response. So I can imagine.
When we were talking with other people, especially just coming out, like our age or younger, people coming out of school, especially when we were overseas, because you're getting all these incentives, we would, they were thrilled by it, right? And they're motivated by it. And they're like, oh my gosh, you've only worked for 20 years. How did you do this? And so that was really meaningful for us to be able to mentor people like that. And they were super excited. I think it just got a little bit awkward when, we're looking at folks that Another one is, kids. To be fair, we don't have kids. A lot of people throw that in as the reason that they can't retire early, which again, I don't have a judgment about that and what they're doing. It's their choice. I will say, it's everyone's own path, but I think there's plenty of people in the FI community that do have families and pull it off, so.
It's possible. You just got to work another year to cover those kids, then you're fine.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to figure out what kind of add beyond it, because we had very similar reactions. I would say, well, my dad is retired and was retired before I was. I think only because as an airline pilot, you have to retire when you're 65, so it's mandated. Honestly, I think he'd probably still be working if it wasn't a mandate, but that was kind of forced upon him. In terms of the coworker thing, we had very similar reactions. I'd say the older the coworker, the more kind of borderline hostility I got. And then from the younger ones, almost all curiosity and like, how did you do it? Tell me more. And it was always like they could see like that was a possibility. Whereas a lot of my older coworkers are just like, my God, how did you do that? I can't even do that. And I should be well above you. And it was interesting. It made the last 3 weeks very weird, I'd say. And it was just kind of an odd transition toward the end.
Yeah, sure. So my dad is not actually retired yet. He still dabbles. He owns his own business. And, in all honesty, I think he's pretty fine with it. It doesn't seem to be phasing him at this point. He kind of has autonomy over his own schedule, though, so I think, he's very happy and will probably work as long as he can because he does not have an age restriction on that. So, and then I would say, one of the most exciting things about resigning was just there were a number of young staff people that I actually had calls with before I left on how we were doing this, what it looked like, and all of those things. And I will say that was extremely gratifying and, told them to stay in touch. I don't know if they will, but again, it was a really good conversation. So.
On the parents question, as a parent, I can tell you, and I was going to kind of make a joke about this, but I'm serious. I would imagine like most people's parents, like you're self-sufficient. That's all I want for my kids. You're not like back on their couch. You know what I mean? Or you may be just temporarily before you go get on the boat. But most parents just want their kids to be like good, kind, self-sufficient human beings. And you guys all meet that criteria times 25 using the 4% rule. And so like that's what you want as a parent. And I think, the average parent would be incredibly happy for you because you've done something kind of cool and you're taking care of yourself and like you're not on their couch, to use that phrase.
One thing that's been interesting is our parents, I think, just generationally, right? Some of this I think is generational. So some of the resentment that you would get kind of from coworkers that were nearing retirement age when you're saying you're retiring is they're like, well, I put in my time. Like I put in my 40 years, you have to too, kind of thing. And that's kind of part of the weird judgment at the end. I think with our parents too, there's sort of just, and some of it's just common expressions, right? Like you say, oh, I got a new job, and everyone's like, oh, that's excellent. Or, like you're like, oh, I'm so busy. And they're like, busy is good, And I think, the FI community and our peers are trying to reframe that. Like when Andy's like, I got a job, and people are like, great, when do you quit? and And then, I said the other day, I was like, I am so busy. And our parents were like, it's good to be busy. And I was like, that's not my goal, right? So I think some of it's just, some of that's just conversation. But I think it's also just a shift in kind of like what we're looking for and finding the people that can reflect, the reaction that, again, the FI community can do that. They're going to reflect the reaction that we're hoping for and that, is meaningful to us. Whereas I think our parents and some of that generation, they're not familiar with it.
Great point. Okay, Catherine, question.
Hi, I'm Catherine Nally. I'll start by asking it to Amber and Bob, but then Stacy and Andy, you can answer too. My question, because you pulled the trigger so recently, with all the, I'll say, market volatility of the past few years, how did that impact your plans on this ramp to FI? Did you accelerate your saving to hit it? Were you just bound and determined that no matter what, you were leaving regardless of what the market did? I'm just curious on your general thoughts and how you approached that and the mindset there too on the approach.
Okay, so it was mostly a line in the sand, and as I mentioned, so we had this number that we ironed off hike after hike after hike, and backed up with lots of spreadsheets. And when the last 2 years, we moved to Maryland because we wanted to buy a boat and sail in the Chesapeake, and we wrote on this whiteboard how many weeks we had left, and we also had basically a gauge of where we were at, kind of according to our FI number. And one of the things, and we had to count down. And it's basically like, if we get above this number, we would consider quitting early. Otherwise, it was the countdown date. 2 years ago, like the last 2 years have been really interesting gains-wise, because like we almost had the same amount after 2 years, because it kind of went down and then it kind of came back up. So like after those 2 years, we're roughly at the same date or at the same amount, a little bit higher, but because we had been putting in. And we're like, you know what? We've been counting down for 120 weeks. We're going to put in our notice, which we did. And within those 3 weeks, we hit our lower number to say below that number we wouldn't retire. And then I'd say a month after that we hit our FI number. So we actually hit our FI number after we quit.
But we did hit our low number. I will say we had 3 weeks for our resignation. So we had already turned in the resignation, but we did hit it before the last day of work. So we were very excited about that. Total luck, but excited about it.
But you wouldn't have changed your plans if it dramatically.
No, because for us, we were close enough, and it was always kind of a rough estimate anyway. So there's a point at which like we probably could have pulled the trigger 2 years earlier, and we probably would have been fine. So at this point, we've just added kind of additional buffer. For us, it was more, we needed something to say, no matter what, when we hit to this point, we would retire, and that's what we ended up doing. I mean, unless the market was down like 40%, maybe we would have considered, but I think for the most part, it was the date, and we were just going to go.
Okay, great.
Yeah, for us it was a little different because we were mainly relying on cash flow from real estate, which has generally stayed pretty consistent even during COVID. But you know, of course, there's the chance that it could rent rates could fall and that could go down. But I think one of the things that really has resonated with me that I've heard kind of on a lot of these, general in the community and a lot of podcasts, with a long retirement, it's not like you're going to wake up one day and be broke, right? Like you have the way that we plan, we being everyone in this community, you're going to see it coming like years away, where you see your trajectory is not exactly what you thought it would be. So, and when you're planning that far ahead, just changing little things, like if you're doing the 4% rule, like doing 3.5% instead of 3.75% for a couple years, or just don't take the inflation adjustment. Like that is a way to change the trajectory over the course of 20 years or so that will basically get you out of the trouble that you got in because the market did what it did. So like I say, for us it was a little different, but I also appreciate that sentiment from the 4% rule people.
And on the flip side, you can also change that by earning a tiny bit of income, right? So you can take out a little bit less, or you can get a tiny little side hustle or a tiny little side job. You can pet sit, maybe.
Part-time job.
Yeah, or you can get a part-time job. Okay, are there other questions?
Hi, Matt from Atlanta. I actually have an observation to share. You said something about volunteering and travel. So I've done this before. There are organizations out there that combine the two. So the one I did was called All Hands and Hearts, but there's no expenses involved in it other than getting to a destination. When I did it, it was right before COVID, the summer before, and I went to St. John, U.S. Virgin Island for like 2.5 weeks and did hurricane volunteer work, and it was one of the best experiences ever. So like for my future, like I want that involved, but they had things in the U.S. and around the world, and so it's a really good way to, based on wherever you are, find opportunities to do things like that. Then the only question I have is for Stacy. I was wondering, was your first pet sitting gig a 4-hour gig or like a month? Because it matters. You don't have to answer that, but
It was an 8-hour shift. It was one day, and she died by lunch. I did call the owner. He got home and took her into the vet when I said things are going poorly. For the record, he works from home, and this one day had to go in. He's in software, had to be in person to do a software implementation. The only reason he hired me to come was because he didn't want to leave her home alone. He just wanted someone to be there because he knew how fragile she was. So ideally, I was going to come every day for 2 weeks while he did this implementation. She just happened to die in 4 hours.
I don't know what to say after that. I was going to make a joke, but then I was like, no, this is not appropriate. Are there any other questions? Not about pet sitting. Thank you, Matt. Okay, Lauren. And then we'll probably do this as our final question. So make it good, Lauren. No pressure.
Lauren, Bob, you mentioned people are typically asking, like, what do you do? And I'm curious what we can do as a community to change that question. So what question should we be asking instead of what do you do going forward?
That's a good question, because it seems to be the default. And actually, we've been struggling with both of the defaults, is what do you do and where are you from? We've at least figured out the where are you from thing, because like now we're like, oh, we're from Baltimore, but like we lived there for 2 years, and yes, that's happened to be where we're coming from last, but we've been living in Colorado probably longer than anywhere else, so we at least solved that problem. Yeah, the what do you do is kind of an interesting thing. It does help kind of define you, and I think it's an easy way to kind of open a conversation with anyone. I don't know, maybe phrasing it like, what do you want to do, or what are you going to be doing kind of moving forward? It might be kind of an interesting way to kind of shift it just slightly, and kind of open up the can of worms to say, it doesn't have to be like what you're doing now doesn't have to define what you're doing going forward. It can be two separate things. It'd be kind of my thought. It'd be like, yeah, what are you doing going forward?
Yeah, so I think we could get to the what are you interested in? What do you do other than work? I think is a really interesting question. And I think it's interesting trying to just ask maybe just different questions than just the default. The what do you do, though, is so easy to say, but maybe we could be a little more intentional about just asking interesting questions. Although I'll have to say all the conversations I've had here are just with interesting people, and so I appreciate all of the conversation too. But maybe we could crowdsource that a little bit as well. But I think you had ideas too.
Well, I more had a story, and I can't remember where I heard this, but years ago, I heard someone basically say, don't ever ask somebody what they do. Like, it's the worst question. You're at a party, wherever, just at a place meeting new people. That's like everybody's go-to question. And their challenge to themselves was, that's a terrible question to ask people. It defines you based on your job and all this stuff. And I loved hearing that. And her challenge was, and again, I couldn't remember who said this, but her challenge was like, ask them a fun question. Ask them something like, what gets you really excited lately? Like, what are you passionate about lately? What are you into? You can ask them a silly question. Wally, I heard you ask somebody, I don't remember if it was Kelly or someone else, but when you sat down here tonight, you said something like, what's the coolest, do you remember what you said? What's the neatest thing you learned today, or the most impact? And it was a really nice, it wasn't just I think I might have asked you what you did earlier today, Kelly, by the way, because sometimes I'm just I don't know. I'm like an introvert, and it's a lot of talking for these days, and I run out of things to say. But I really do challenge myself to not ask people that. And I loved hearing Wally say that, what's the most impactful thing you've learned today? Because that's a interesting question to start a conversation with someone. And so I think, to answer your question too, one of the things we can all do is never again ask anybody what they do. Also, there's nothing wrong with saying you're early retired. That's a great conversation starter. I say it all the time when people ask me that. I'm like, I retired 2 years ago, and now I have a podcast for fun. I have some rental property. It kind of opens it into interesting things. You could say you're learning how to oil paint, get into all sorts of things. You pet sit on the side.
The one question that I like to ask, it's similar to what do you do, but it's what do you, and similar to what Bob said, actually, what do you want to do? But I what do you like to do? And it's a weird question, because it's just weird enough that people kind of look at you funny, and they're like, I don't know how to answer this question, because they never get asked that. But even though it's a little awkward, that's kind of what I try to ask. But yeah, and I think in this community does a lot better job than the general public at not leading with that question, but it is hard because it's kind of an awkward question.
Okay, unless there's any burning question here left, I think we're going to wrap this up. I really appreciate all of you, you guys joining, Andy and Stacy, Bob and Amber, and everyone in the audience joining. Thank you very much. I don't know why I'm doing all these hand motions, but thank you very much. And yeah, that's it. Any final parting? Nope, let's just cheer. I never had a live audience. This is so exciting. I'm going to use that clap track at the end of every podcast from now on. I'm going to be like, they love that episode. Okay, seriously, thank you guys.